Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third budget workshop. I am pleased to start out with our central administration budget. Our central administration budget comprises of our Board of Education, our superintendent's office, Pupil Services, and our Public Information Office. Our current budget will share a story that deals greatly with succession planning. So you're going to see some increases here through the course of my presentation, but I'll share with you a little bit more specifics in a minute. But what you can see is that we are the fifth lowest of Monroe County relative to this area of the budget. The county average is 1.39%, while ours is 1.04% of our total budget. Within this area, we've tried to find a way to land on the right types of personnel in different areas. So you'll see, and it's common to see year over year, shifts in budget based on personnel and where they may land. So you may see shifts from the human resource department into this area of the budget, or people from the business office to this area of the budget. But subsequently, you'll see an offset somewhere else in the budget. As I shared before, much of our increase this year, because it's significant when you look at it from a percentage-wise, from a dollar amount perspective, it's a $189,533 increase. If I could just give a synopsis of where we stand relative to administrators in our district, which is why our succession planning has been so critical. So within our district, if we start at the elementary level, we have one elementary principal at 2 years experience. We have two elementary principals with almost 1 year experience. And then we will have two brand new hires next year. So 2, 1, 1, 0, 0. So our elementary principals has a significant turnover. At the secondary level, as in the building administrative positions, we have 4 administrators that are non-tenured, which means they're either 3 or 4 or less years experienced. The district office, we have 4 district office administrators that are in their first year. We also have 4 additional district administrators that are non-tenured. And we have critical retirements this year in our assistant superintendent, Melanie Ward, and also our principal at Allen Creek, Mike Biondi. When you total all of that up, as far as an organization, for those of you that are within an organization, work in an organization, or are president or CEO or HR, you understand the significance of losing this proportion of your administrative staff. So in total, we have 17 administrators in our district that are 3 years or less in total experience in Pittsford. That's significant. So that will reflect on our budget. Budgets should reflect our needs, and this is one area where we've seen a need. So you can see this visually here, the same numbers, but in a graph form. Nothing of significance here other than a change in human resources. And again, this is an area where we've taken from one place and replaced it to another. So we will be posting for an HR position in the very near future. We have Melanie Ward, thank goodness, that is coming on, who is not considered in this slide, in our FTE slide. But she will be working closely with us for a few months. So her position will be considered temporary and part-time. So it's not included in the FTEs, but it's certainly included in the total expenditures. We are going to rely heavily on the experience that Melanie's had in our district for so long, her institutional knowledge, and her exemplar pedagogical degree, pedigree for all that's great in our instruction. So she will work closely with our elementary principals. We also have a retirement in the teacher center that takes place during a time when it's our busiest point for professional development in the summer, so Melanie will also assist with that. Specific to the Board of Education, we are the second lowest per student in the county. I do want to check again who's the first lowest, because our Board of Education really does not do much as far as overnight trips, dinners, etc. You have all been steadfast in going to workshops that are local and doing everything we possibly can to save money on our end. But our Board of Education is responsible for everything from professional memberships and professional development to everything associated with voting, to making sure we're living our mission, vision, values, to assessing how well we are doing as it relates to our strategic initiative, and advocacy, as you'll hear later in our board meeting today with the recent trip to Albany. Other work from the office, it's significant and it's varied from day to day and from short term to long term. I won't read the entire list. Each one has its own strategic plan to it. But essentially, this is making sure our organization is running as smoothly and seamlessly as possible, with being extremely focused on how well our students are doing and how well our family and community members are feeling being part of our Pittsford Central School District. As we think about next year, we not only are thinking about what our organization is going to look like with all the new hires, but how we're able to maintain and continue our work as it relates to equity and inclusion, and making sure all are safe, our facilities are safe, we're prepared, our students are, and staff and parents are feeling connected and are displaying a sense of citizenship that we can all be proud of. And we are in year one of a 3-ish year strategic initiative, so that work will continue on a significant level, which hopefully will yield our students being able to experience rigorous, engaging, and authentic experiences in the classroom on a regular basis. From this office, from my office specifically, you will see that bump, and that bump is primarily from the succession planning model that I shared earlier. And again, you can see all of the other aspects that the office is responsible for. My office specifically is 7th lowest per student cost in the county. From the HR realm, I have to applaud our entire HR department for their work with DASA, hiring and retaining the highest quality employees during a time when it's difficult to do that. I believe at this point we've almost finished every contract negotiation over the last 2 years. Teacher and administrator evaluations falls under the Human Resource Department, as well as all of the work that we do to keep our buildings and classrooms well staffed. This area is the 5th lowest student cost in the county. Our PIO office, our Public Information Office, you'll see nothing out of the ordinary here relative to costs, except for the natural increase that are associated with everything else that you see in contracts. But can't thank Nancy's office enough for getting us out there, being front and center, being proactive, being able to share all the great things that our district does, responding to media inquiries, and coordinating all the communication that comes from our district. This area is the 4th highest cost per student in the county. And then we have the Board of Education and central office, or the central administration combined. When we look at all of us put together, you can see in green the percent of breakdown of the Board of Ed and the district clerk. In maroon, the superintendent's office. In gold, the human resource office. And in blue, the public information office. So with that, I ask the board if there are any questions relative to my side of the budget. Okay. Next, we have Melanie Ward, our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, that will take us through our building budgets.
Good evening. I am pleased to be here again tonight to share with you the summary of our school building-based budgets and how that breaks out. There are no significant changes this year over what I've presented relative to this budget in the past, but I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions. So certainly the heart of our work lives at our buildings. That's why we're all here. That's where our students come every day. And so we pay particular attention to making sure that our buildings have the resources that they need in order to meet the needs of the students who walk through those doors every day. The building budget covers all of the things that you see listed there on the left hand of the slide, from the staff through all the co-curricular activities and athletics are all incorporated into the building budget. And going into next school year, we're looking at a building-based budget of approximately $64 million, which is about a 3.2% increase from the current year. This is the year-over-year kind of story of the building budgets, just in totality over the last 5 years. And then this is the same data, only broken down by high school, middle school, and elementary school. And then finally, the same data essentially, but this time it's broken down for you on a per pupil basis by level. So you can see the per pupil building-based budgets at the elementary level. In the gold bars, the maroon bars in the middle are the middle school level per pupil costs, and the blue bars represent the high school per pupil costs. The middle school and high school school budgets, it is important to note, include the athletics at each of those levels, as well as significantly more co-curricular activities that take place at those secondary buildings. 94% of the building-based budgets are attached directly to staff salaries, and the remaining 6% essentially covers everything else. So this is a very people-heavy area of our budget. And when we think about the building budget, it's important to remember that there are a wide variety of folks who make up the staff at the building level, including most of our certificated staff are funded through the building budgets. There are some staff members whose salaries are paid either through the student services or special ed department or through some grant funding. But the vast majority of our certificated staff, as well as our non-certificated staff, salaries live in the building budgets, which is why this is such a hefty budget area for us. Another part of the building budgets at the high school level are our career and tech ed programs. This is the EMCC program offered through BOCES, and we have over the last couple of years upped our budget in this area as we have seen increasing numbers of students who desire to participate in the EMCC program. I know many of you participated in a tour of that program last year. If you haven't had the chance to do that, I highly recommend it. Our students who attend the EMCC program in any one or more of these fields of study experience a great deal of success. They come out of this program, if they complete the program with professional certifications, they're able to go directly into a well-paying job in the community or continue their academic studies in either a 2 or a 4-year college, and we have kids make all of those choices. So it is I think it's an exemplary program, and it's definitely meeting the needs of more of our students of late. The building instructional materials budget, these are the state-aided materials, textbooks, library books, hardware, and software. These come to us on a per-pupil basis, and you can see that there's been a little drop in that budget over the last couple of years. And then finally, the building discretionary budget. This is really the only aspect of the building budget that a building principal has any authority over how they spend it. So they get a kind of a lump sum based on a per pupil dollar amount, and then they need to figure out how to use that amount to cover all of the additional expenses that it takes to run their building. This year, for the first time in, I believe, 10 years, the district raised the per pupil allocation by about $20 per pupil per level. So you do see the increase there in the total discretionary budget, and that is simply because of that slight bump up to the per pupil allocation to really just kind of keep up with those cost of living expenses. The price of all of these things has gone up, and so we've been able to support them a little bit better in that. The budget resources for the buildings come from all of the typical places, most especially from our property tax levy, BOCES aid, New York instructional aid material, and some title grants to offset some staffing and programming supports. As always, there are ongoing challenges when we consider how we allocate the money at the building and how we use that money to support what we need. We're always looking carefully at the sectioning at the elementary level, and for the last several years, enrollment and the way enrollment has fallen out at the buildings has required us to increase the number of sections at some of our elementary schools. We continue to experience staffing shortages in just about every single area that you can think of. And while you might say, well, that sounds like it's a budget savings, it's not at all a budget savings for us. It not only puts stress on the operations of the building, but it often involves paying people to do additional work above and beyond what they're hired to do initially in order to cover things like teachers who are absent and we can't find subs, paraprofessionals who are absent, et cetera. Student behaviors and mental health needs are something that we continue to attend to, and we're constantly working to realign our staff and programming to meet our enrollment trends, as we are also seeking to secure funding to ensure equitable opportunities for all students to participate in co-curricular and extracurricular experiences. You've had a wonderful group of students here a couple of weeks ago sharing with you the successes of the robotics team, and that's just one example of the amazing opportunities our kids have and how we look to find ways to support those experiences. We've continued this year to focus on building relationships and welcoming and affirming environments in all of our school buildings and all of our school community. We've also this year really celebrated a return to a focus on instructional practice, as our teachers in all 9 buildings throughout the year have been engaged in conversations related to the strategic initiative and the use of our instructional hub to round out their instructional practices to meet the needs of their students. We continue at the building level to work on alignment of essential curriculum and instruction, to embed those technology tools, and to provide behavioral and mental health supports to our students in need. As we continue forward, we have many of the same needs on an ongoing basis. We continue to see students with a wide range of academic skills within each class, and we need to equip our teachers to provide for all of those students in front of them every day. Learning how to better use our existing structures to provide those just-in-time interventions to meet student needs at all levels. Aligning essential learning, integrating our SEL strategies with our academic work at the Tier 1 level. Again, supporting, you can see a recurring theme of supporting students' social, emotional, and mental health needs, and again, making sure that all students have opportunities to succeed. And then this kind of wraps together the current versus projected budgets for at the building level with that 3.21% increase. So with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer them. You're welcome. I think it's Mr. Vespi up next. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll start with support staff services and wrap up with the undistributed budget tonight. I think the only thing I would start out by adding to Melanie's discussion is we did feel that it was time, based on inflationary pressures, to take a look at the student supplies and materials, and it had been, quite flat. So it made sense to look at that allocation as an increase before the budget process started. So, I think that was overdue. But our staff is very fiscally conservative, and we rarely spend all of the money that we have budgeted. So that's something that we do monitor very closely, and it's a very positive sign in terms of what we need versus just spending the money because it's part of a budget. So it's very, very positive. So in terms of the support services overview, certainly I'm responsible for the support staff operations. We monitor those operations very carefully. 219 full-time positions. I oversee the finance, operations, and maintenance, student transportation, and this is always a good time to remind everyone, I also oversee food service, but food service is a separate fund. More, and I won't talk a lot about it tonight, but you hear during the treasurer's report that I talk about the fact that
that has to operate separately as a business, but that line is becoming more blurred in terms of the general fund providing fiscal support when necessary. But again, I think as I mentioned last time, the fund is self-sufficient at this time, but we do look at ways and make sure we're feeding children that are in need, and that might require some support from the general fund in the future. So the total budget's about $20 million, or 12.4% of the total budget, and about 18% of total district staffing. So obviously you know a lot about each of the departments. I'm not going to read each slide. The information's there. But certainly we make sure kids get to school. We make sure they're fed when they get here. We make sure that classrooms are clean, and that our facilities are appropriate for learning. Our office, our back office, handles the regulatory and compliance issues on a daily basis. So all of the grant administration, we just had fire inspections, that type of support work. We really have had more stable staffing compared to previous years. You'll notice less bus routes that have been canceled on a daily basis. We're still not able to provide the service and transportation that I think the district was used to, but at least we're not canceling and providing late buses and more of that model. It's the same thing. I had a chance to speak with Mr. Beardsley, and we're stable. We'll lose a few employees, and then we're able to, start to, see more folks interested in this work. I can tell when I walk outside of my office and I can see, people filling out the required paperwork for HR. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a turnaround there. Certainly we still have a long lead time in terms of preparing drivers. So we're one of the lowest per student spending in Monroe County, 26% below the average. So it's funny because I was sitting there, and Mr. Pirro, when you asked that question, I of course had to pull up the answer to see who was the lowest spending, and I'll reveal that later. But the data and how we get that data, it's data lag. It's from our required financial reports. I have it live on my computer anytime we need it. So we really do keep an eye, an eye on that. It means a lot to look at data and comparative data as we go through this budget process. So we do look to see how we perform from an efficiency standpoint, and it's important to us to have those benchmarks, just like everything else that we do in education. So we do look at that. So it is one of the lowest spending as a percent of operating budget in the county. So I'm going to give an overview. I like this slide because you can see that operations, maintenance, and security are the biggest chunk of the operation, and then transportation and, of course, finance and audit and technology are the smallest ones as a function. And then overall, when you look at the breakdown, as Melanie pointed out, we're a people business, so the majority of our budgets are salaries and benefits. And you can see BOCES is the other piece of that. In the operations and maintenance budget, we always look at utilities and contracted services, not contracts, but services that we reach out to get repairs. And that's, between utilities and outside services, there's a lot. I think this slide is interesting from a staffing standpoint. I think as Mr. Clark pointed out during his briefing not too long ago, we've got to look back at the additional FTEs that we've added over the past 5 years. And so when I look at this slide, it wasn't in the support staff services area. In fact, we'd like to see that grow, especially in terms of transportation from a service standpoint. So it's really been stable as you look over the past 5 years in total FTEs. So finance and audit, some of you serve on the audit oversight committee. Obviously, school business is one of the most regulated industries in the state. And that's a good thing from a taxpayer standpoint and fiscal accountability standpoint. So 4,400 purchase orders, 44 competitive bids, a lot of checks that go in and out of the district, a lot of accountability in terms of that audit process. We see all the federal, state, and retirement all the taxation, all those all the oversight for those reports comes through the finance office. And what's been a big challenge this year are major changes in the district's health insurance plan. Not that it was a district choice, right? It was a local cooperative consortium choice. And so, about 800 retirees had their Medicare plan changed, not just here, but countywide. So certainly that was a lot of work on top of the regular responsibilities that our staff had. And Leanne and her staff in the business office did a phenomenal job with some of those extra duties this year. In terms of our financial forecasting, we have to keep an eye on state aid and actually see what comes in. We do a lot of work in that area. Mike and I both have talked about advocacy efforts. We put that information together, and I attend the meetings on a consortium level in terms of rate setting for workers' comp and health benefits. And when we get to the undistributed benefit slide, you'll see there's a huge chunk of our budget that comes in those areas. So that's another big responsibility and that I take care of. We've done an extensive fund balance review and analysis of reserves. That's going to come into play not as much this year, but into the future. So I think that's important to note. And then last year, we had a lot of communication about the district's debt service plan, which is simply our mortgage payments to maintain our facilities, right? And that was really in play. That'll be in play again as we look at our long-range facilities plan. And you'll see me talk a little bit about that on factors bearing on the district's future. So we try to manage that because of its direct relationship, as I stated previously, to the tax cap. So that's another big area to look at. So really minimal change in this year's budget. We put we have these slides are consistent. We have the average annual increase in outline staffing, 8th lowest cost in the county at about $180 per student compared to $281. So we're benchmarking very positively. I won't go through all of the accomplishments, but certainly from a fiscal standpoint, the one that I'll highlight is the more money you spend in reserves or appropriated fund balance, the less you have in savings. The impact is on your bond rating, the higher the interest rates when we go to borrow. So that's something that we really try to manage, and we're doing a phenomenal job with the highest AA bond rating that keeps getting approved as we go out to borrow for our debt service. Operations, maintenance, and security, it's always amazing to look at the number of fields, to look at the square footage that is maintained across the district. And again, Jeff and his staff they do an amazing job. I think they caught a little break. I hope I'm not saying this too early about snow plow and removal this year, right? We've had pretty fortunate in terms of that. So hopefully less maintenance from that. But 204 acres of land, 40 athletic fields, they do an amazing job, and they get lots and lots of compliments. I think it was just last week we had some maintenance facility issues while this building was being utilized. Our staff was on it and made sure that there wasn't a significant interruption during one of the clubs. So really huge responsibility. They do a phenomenal job. 92 workers. Jeff does a great job from the analysis on staffing on each building, right? Almost like his own analysis of staffing that you need per classroom, et cetera, for the size of buildings. And I think he's got really the right staffing mix to maintain our facilities. I've never worked in a school district where someone in that position can call the town or the village and have equipment up here to take care of a water main break in 30 seconds. We have amazing cooperative relationships that I think that says something. If they need something, we need something, it's a great relationship. So last year when I talked about this, right, I didn't really know. This year I can definitely, attest to it. When we had a water main break over at the high school, everybody came over to respond. So You can't say enough about, our local relationship with the town and village. Their budget really is generally status quo as well. And I always worry when I put this up, are we going to get hit with huge increases in natural gas and electricity? We're actually doing pretty well this year. So where we got hit a little bit last year, I think we've got some excess in that area, so we're pretty stable this year, which is great. 9th lowest cost in the county. You can see the breakdown there. So accomplishments, Jeff is working on a sustainability committee as part of the district planning team. We're looking at LED lights. We're looking at energy savings. He's had 2 emergency projects, the roofing at Sutherland and then the heat pumps at Calkins. He does a great job in terms of making sure. A little nervous about the heating in November, but they got that pump in and everything worked fine. It controlled the heating controls to the auditorium over there, so he did a great job. And then on top of it, Jeff and Shana do just amazing work from a safety and security perspective. So when he doesn't have this hat on, he has the safety and security hat on, and they've been doing great work around the district. So just a really good overall snapshot there. When I get to this slide, it's simple because Matt was here last time and did the budget presentation. From my vantage point, the biggest challenge that we have in the technology support area is as we add one-to-one devices, it has an impact on staffing. So we've increased staffing from last year, as you'll recall. We'll have to continue to evaluate whether or not we have enough staffing in this area to support those additional devices. The other thing that happens with technology is that it has a shelf life. So we have to have that replacement plan. So those are the 2 biggest impacts in this area that we've got to look at. Now, we purchase our instructional technology materials through BOCES. So that drives aid back to the district, right? So the focus really is to shift the mindset from using year-end funds to starting to bring that replacement cost into the budget. And one of the things that I spoke up during that presentation is to say that will stabilize our BOCES aid estimate, right? So we're always transparent on the expense side, not so much on the revenue side. So I wanted to make sure I called your attention to, while we add this money to the budget on the expense side, we can also increase the revenue expected next year and then make it a more predictable amount. What typically happens in that January state aid run that comes from the executive budget, our BOCES aid is always low because it doesn't reflect the February database update where we know we're going to spend more money with year end. So this will stabilize the revenue forecast and make it easier for everyone to understand as it becomes more predictable based on our replacement plan. So that's really positive. And again, as was pointed out, we live in a world now where our network is constantly attacked. So Dr. Kimmer's done a great job in terms of aligning resources that we've now put in the budget. Started out in a grant, and we've now put in the budget to really make sure that we're protecting our network because of how important it is to have, really the operational, you can't have any downtime and be successful. And I think we see that everywhere 24/7. Tonight, there's a couple of main resolutions that are going to be voted on. The main one is to reestablish the technology reserve. And again, I'm not going to repeat this. Matt did a great job. But our plan is to spend money out of the reserve. It's a capital reserve. The voters have to vote to approve it. We also need to renew the reserve that was created 10 years ago. So we're going to, so the voters are going to vote on 2 aspects of technology. One is to spend $500,000 from the reserve. The second one is to renew a new technology reserve. And we put it out there based on our projected use of technology. We're going to have to renew that reserve or we'll run out of funds in 27, 28. So, this is no cost whatsoever. Because we've saved the money, when we do the technology replacement plan, there's no impact as a result of this amount to the levy. Yeah. Yep. So you can see on the next slide, we make sure we highlight that. And this is the resolution for the $500,000 in spending. and then the resolution to create a new 10-year reserve with a max limit of $15 million. So again, these are capital reserves. So the board has to vote to approve it, the voters have to vote to approve it, and then the same thing when it comes to spending. Transportation, again, I've already mentioned, we're still not fully staffed. We still struggle to transport on occasion out of district students. We're doing a lot of cooperatives. My concern is we're still spending a lot more than historically in the past on contracted transportation services. We need more drivers so that we can reduce the cost. Now, both is aidable, right? But we like to have control of our own buses and drivers, right? It's just a comfort piece and a coordination piece. And so, that's really the biggest area. We have a massive transportation operation, and our what's called non-allowable pupil decimal I'm actually having reviewed because we transport a lot of kids that we wouldn't normally transport, right? And then we lose transportation aid as a result of that. So that's an area that I really am going to take a look at and to make sure that we're not losing aid that we shouldn't be losing in terms of that reporting. But this kind of gives you a snapshot of our district. And again, this is an expense-driven aid category. So for every dollar you spend, you get roughly about 67 cents back, depending on the particular category. So it's really important for us to maximize the return on our investment through transportation expenses. And that's why I always tell folks in tough budget times, it's tough to make a budget cut and then look at the net impact in terms of transportation, right? So that's how that works. Modest increase in transportation. We phased in really some additional increases to drivers' salaries. You recall we were using federal funds to support those increases, and we've done a good job at phasing those expenses in over the 2-year period. So that budget really consists of that phase-in. It's the third lowest cost in the county on a per-student basis. And again, that's either good or bad when you look at it from a service standpoint. So we'll continue to keep a close eye on that. Certainly the biggest thing in terms of transportation is we want to make sure we're safe. And our New York State Department of Transportation record is stellar. Our mechanics are top-notch. Our dispatchers are phenomenal. And Carla really does a good job with her skills and experience in the area to set up our cooperative transportation agreements with other districts in the area. But we still disappoint because we don't have a large enough staff to really do everything. We have field trips, but our field trips are really limited to 9:30 to 1:30. But there's a number of our students that require transportation at 7:30 in the morning, and they want to come back later. That's a limiting factor that we deal with. So if you do hear disappointment, it's usually in that area. And again, fuel costs have been pretty stable. Definitely not going to go through this slide, but when you have a chance, take a look at this replacement plan in terms of our buses. This gives you all the information about our pickup points, what's in state law, and then our non-allowable. So you can see I updated that. We're losing about $1.3 million in aid by transporting students that really could be in walk zones, et cetera. So that may be an area that we look at in the future. About 904,000 miles. Our goal last year was an 8-year replacement plan for buses. The reality is it's 9, and obviously I don't have to say it. From an advocacy standpoint, we talk a lot about electric buses, right? We have 2 more budget cycles to purchase gas and or diesel buses, and then we're not quite sure what's going to happen. There's been some discussion about delaying that legislation. I know some legislation was introduced and quickly rejected, so we'll see what happens. So it's really important for us to be able to have an 8-year replacement plan. So if we need some transition years to figure this out, we're able to do it. So, you know, as soon as you get past the 10-year mark, buses become very expensive. You have some major expenses at the 9-year mark, and that's why our goal is really to get to 8 years, but we're holding strong at about that 9-year mark. And our biggest enemy is corrosion. So here are the buses to be replaced. And then you're going to see a larger amount this year because it's all big buses that we're buying. We're not buying any of the smaller buses. So the number of buses, we usually replace, 11, 12, right in that area. This year we're proposing 13. And again, we're using a capital reserve to do that. So there's no impact on the tax levy as a result of this. We're using money in a savings account to offset the purchase of these buses. On that note, the concern always is, well, how much do we have in the savings account to replenish it, right? So, at current projections, about 2.5 more budget cycles at this rate. So we're fine, but we'll need to replenish. And then again, those bus purchases are aidable, so we get a portion of the money back. Here's kind of a really neat thing about what we've been doing in transportation. Instead of just trading buses in, we've been sending them to auction. So instead of getting $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 on a trade-in, we're getting much more. If you look in the last Treasurer's report, we're north of $220,000 in auctioning buses and other vehicles. So that market is still really solid, and especially with the 99.9% DOT approval rating, whoever's buying our buses knows they're getting a really good bus that's been well maintained. So that drives the price up. Cost saving factors always, right, is route efficiency study and consolidation. There's a trade-off between how long kids are on the bus and the service we provide and the efficiency of our routes, but we're constantly looking at those. Questions about anything up to date? All right, and then the most important piece of the presentation is purchases of $2.2 million. Again, using the reserves, no tax levy, and here's the actual resolution. So you might get some questions about why, usually it's about 1.6 to 1.7. It's a little bit higher. The reason is we're trying to get ahead of that on that replacement plan in preparation of what we're going to have to do in the future. Questions at that point? I'll pause. Yes, ma'am.
Just one question that I thought of as you were talking about the money that we get back from the buses at auction. Where does that get factored into budgeting?
So it's actually a transportation aid deduct, so it works a little bit against us.
Okay.
But it just goes in on the revenue side as a budgeted revenue. So if the market continues to be what it is, instead of budgeting, roughly $60,000, we can up that revenue by a couple $100,000 to offset any shortfalls that we have. So that's where it goes. But we have to be careful because it is a deduct on how much transportation aid that we get back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, yes.
You mentioned the non-allowable pupil decimal. I was just wondering if you could talk more about that, and I think you said you were trying to change.
It's literally on a given day, you do an analysis of how many kids are on each bus that are in a zone as determined by the state where they don't qualify for aid. So it's a representation of how many students we transport that we're not getting aid from the state for. That's what it stands for. It's a really important factor in determining routes. So it's interesting because, especially in this day and age, you balance how close are homes to the school with safety, right? And so, in my opinion, that state law has been around a long time. Little archaic thinking. It doesn't take into consideration safety, if you will, from a mindset from 20 years ago until now. So again, I report it just because it's part of the calculation. I'm hesitant to make judgment on it, and you really have to look at, if you're going to make any of those adjustments, you'd really have to look closely at it. Yeah, great question. Anything else? Okay, the undistributed budget is always the highlight of everyone's third budget workshop. It's really the part of the budget that includes debt service, mortgage payments, judgments, penalties, legal fees, insurance fees, and employee benefits. So really exciting stuff. But it is important. It reminds me, just a quick overview. I'm going to try to pause a little bit tonight and just provide some thoughts in terms of the benefit side of what we do, because it's a huge part of the budget and it's really something that we don't talk a lot about, right? So when you look and get a paycheck, you look at the salary portion of your paycheck. If you tack on all the other benefits that are there, the benefit of working in a school district looks much differently from that standpoint. And that's really what this budget is about, right? It's about $57 million of roughly $161 million budget. It's a big chunk of the budget when we talk about overall school district budgeting, right? Employee benefits, as a part of that undistributed benefit, budget, is 82% of it, right? So you're looking at health, dental, et cetera, and we'll break that out. Debt service, the trend continues to go down, which is why we got that capital project approved last year to stabilize it. We'll continue to have to plan our debt service forecast in consideration of our facilities improvements, right, and our long-range facilities plan. And I'll talk about two factors bearing on the district's future, but this really is all about planning future facilities projects. Within that dollar amount, we do about $600,000 in transfer to capital, which are local projects and emergency projects, which, quite frankly, we've had 2 in the last 2 years, so it's important. So you can see that downward trend. We talked a lot about this last year, and you can see it now. It's starting to stabilize. When we see the next drop-off, we'll be coming to the board hopefully 2 years in advance to prepare for our next facilities vote. And I anticipate that to be in probably 2 years. Insurance judgments and fees, legal fees are typically the biggest one. If any of you have looked at your own personal auto insurance, you're noticing large increases, and you're probably thinking, boy, I want to shop this, right? So we're looking at the same thing. But the school district insurance around the state is up 13 to 15%. And personal lines, if you look at your own, bills are a little closer to 18 to 20%. So that's just a general industry, and that really has impacted us. The second leading aspect of that is cybersecurity insurance. We're working with Dr. Kimmer's office and a statewide consortium to offer some solutions there for some savings. We've all kind of been doing our own thing, and one of the BOCES down in the Albany area is trying to put something together for that. So we'll look at that. Employee benefits in general, really you can see the upward trend there. There were some savings achieved by switching from Excelis to Aetna for our Medicare Advantage plan. So there is some savings. Typically you'd see a higher percent budget-to-budget increase. But TRS is going from 13.1% to 15.2%, hence the 1% I talked about on the tax cap that we could exclude, $24,000. And then TRS is going from 9.76 to 10.02. And I want to pause and just talk quickly about that. Interesting, the other day in a small group session talked about these benefits. What that means is for every dollar that we pay for teacher salary, administrator salary, 10 cents is going to the teacher's retirement system on behalf of the district. If most employees in their first years of service, they're contributing 3%. The district's contributing 10 now. If you look back 20 years, that rate was less than 1%, right? So that certainly has become a big piece of the operating budget. And then on the support staff side, that's about 15.2 cents, right? So that's what that means. And certainly we keep a close eye on all the other employee benefits throughout the year. So when you look at this slide and you're looking at the health and dental piece, estimated budget about $30.6 million for health insurance and about $1.1 million for dental, about $5.5 million for teachers' retirement system costs, $2.7 for the employees' retirement system cost, $5.7 million for Social Security, which is a direct percentage on wages. So why do I pause and talk a little bit more about that? When we look at our staffing increases of roughly 83 positions over the last 5 years, it's not just the positions, right, and the salaries that go with them. It's also the corresponding benefits, which is a huge part of the budget. So we have to, when we're looking at school budgets, we have to factor both into consideration as we make future decisions. Now, what do? We try to look at this from a percent standpoint, and you can see the last 2 years have been stable. We're very pleased in terms of that. We belong to the Rochester Area Schools Health Plan, right? So that stabilizes our expenses. What's unique about this plan in particular, though, it's calendar year and not fiscal year. So there's a mid-year change with these plans. So right now we have to estimate a dollar amount for that mid-year shift. I actually have both of the RASH meetings tomorrow, and you got to start looking more of a trend analysis to be able to forecast that. That's going to be important in the future as we look at future budgets. And obviously we want to be very conservative. This plan, I'm not going to be a spokesperson for the plan, but this plan performs very well from a pooled risk standpoint. So school districts are doing the right thing in Monroe County by, banding together, and it's a very, very strong plan and great oversight, consultation, and leadership. So really, what are the accomplishments in terms of what we do? Obviously, we manage our benefits very closely. The challenge is, as a percentage of the cost increasing, typically the employee contribution for these benefits is fixed, and it only changes during negotiations. So that's something where the percent of increase that's happening in the benefit category might exceed necessarily the offsetting contribution. So that's something that's tricky, but that's something that as a district we have to look at. We have no control over the employees' retirement system or teachers' retirement system rates, strictly driven by actuary studies and the performance in the stock market, right? So we hope that both funds have heavily invested in NVIDIA, and those rates are going to go down in the future, but we don't know. They typically do not do that, and they invest in long-term steady investments. And quite frankly, most of the funds are in the bond market, which hasn't performed very well with rising interest rates. So we know that that's why these system rates are going to increase. But certainly, we have no control over it. We have to pay those pieces. So we look for balance in terms of the benefit items that we can control. Real quickly, looking at the timing of this presentation, we're done with federal COVID money. And when you look back at the last 3 to 4 years of our surpluses where we've been able to replenish reserves, I don't anticipate that level of replenishment. So I'm really concerned about this budget that I'm presenting, that the margins to be able to regenerate some of the spending of reserves is going to be much, much more tighter as we absorb some of the positions and some of the expenses without that offset in state aid. I'll just say electric buses and the future, right? There's some questions I know coming out of the transportation department about our facilities. Yes, eventually we're going to have to look at facilities to be able to have over 115 electric buses if the mandate holds. So there's definitely going to be an impact on facilities. We have requests for increased air conditioning in our schools with some of the warmer days that we see. And certainly, I won't get into the requests, but there's an ongoing look at our pools in Pittsford. We've got the March 22, so the project that was approved last March, that financing is going to shift from bond anticipation notes to bonding. And we've got to look at what that impact is. So that's a factor that bears on the future. I mentioned contract transportation, employee benefits, general salaries, and expectation. CPI figure came out again yesterday, the Consumer Price Index that measures inflation, and it's still in that 3.8% range. So people are still paying more for products and services, and the expectation in wages is reflected when that happens. And then some of these other areas that Mr. Pero has mentioned, where every year in a budget request, there's more requests for security, mental health, literacy, special programs, and general support. Last but not least, I have mentioned to several groups in the district that without additional support from the state, we are going to look at future structural deficits. And I don't want to sound the alarm bell too soon, but it's something that we're certainly going to have to contend with. So, receiving $1,161 as an increase on the revenue side from state support and being capped from a tax cap standpoint does not bode well for a district that rolls budgets over well in excess of what the revenue will be from those two sources. So I think it's a huge concern that I have that we've got to pay close attention to. And as you all know, we're well in front of that, way out ahead of it, and we're working on that collaboratively with many stakeholder groups. So we've got some work ahead of us. We're not going to see an on-time budget. We know that because April 1st interferes with a holiday. And we know that because the legislative session is budgeted for another 2 weeks past April 1st. So it's unlikely that when I stand in front of you next that will happen. I don't know what happened to the display, but what I will tell you is that April 11th, we have a district planning team meeting. April 16th, we'll be standing in front of you with a presentation that puts everything together. I'll say verbally, we're at about a 4% budget-to-budget increase. I mentioned tax cap at 2.69%. I don't expect much change from that, so very reasonable budget-to-budget increase. I think reasonable on the tax side. Maybe a couple $100,000 in the legislative restoration of the budget, but hopefully before you adopt the budget, you'll know more. If not, we'll give an update at May 14th during the hearing, and then we've got the vote on the 21st. Questions? Comments?